All right, welcome to the first official P5Live Sessions session. Had a beta session last week that you can go check out, but this kicks off what will hopefully be a weekly stream of just messing around live code visuals, playing in P5 JS via P5Live, this editor that we see in front of us that we can tweak and change super quickly. And I think I'm going to call it accidentally educational or unintentionally educational because I'm just going to kind of mess around, maybe have some ideas of what I want to go into, but then I'm just going to play and see where it goes. Maybe I'll open up for requests later. Otherwise, I have some ideas of how each week could be a little bit different, differently structured. Let's check that things are working like our audio. Check, it looks good. Okay. And actually what I'm gonna do, I was trying to think of what do I want to do today. And I think I'm really curious to do some orbiting of motion. This is like a little chalkboard that I'm gonna introduce soon to P5Live. The idea that you have like a little basic drawing tool that you can just sort of sketch on and say hello, or to use to sort of mark up or explain ideas while teaching and want to maybe highlight code. It might be translucent, we'll see. But basically what I'm interested to play with tonight is orbiting. Just this idea of something going in one direction and then maybe other things are going around that thing, and then maybe around that thing offset a bit is a thing that kind of goes around like so. Because every time I'm teaching P5 or processing and showing 3D, it's really fun to play with rotate X and Y and Z. And to get this kind of orbiting motion, you just have to play with how offset you are from wherever the 0, 0 point is. So if that's 0, 0, this thing is spinning and it's just like maybe 100 or 200 pixels away from the 0, 0 point, and then you get this orbiting motion. And so I'm kind of curious what happens if we just exploit that for a while and send these things like a little ways away from each other at different speeds, at different rotations, and see where that takes us. So I'm going to start a new sketch, show my code, and hope that the audio and everything is good out there for you all. And the first thing I'm going to do is put us in 3D mode, WebGL. So now I'm activating 3D. Let's give ourselves a background. I'm going to be a little lazy, I think, at times and leave the semicolon off because we really don't need it in JavaScript, only once in a while. And if I were to draw a sphere, we get such a thing. Maybe it's also nice to see through the thing. So no fill. Let's make it white. Let's make it a little bigger. And what's so nice, P5JS with their 3D WebGL, it's just so nice and easy to use. We can just send things into motion by just saying rotate Y, and this is converting degrees into radians. So maybe even from the start, I'll just say angle mode degrees, and then I don't have to use radians throughout the code because we're going to do a lot of rotates. So it'd be nicer if I could just use degrees. So now we got this thing spinning. I think I'm going to hide. Maybe I'll give this thing a name right off the bat. I'm going to call it P5Live Session Orbiting 01. Okay, and let's hide our menu. So we got this thing spinning. Make it a little smaller, even a little smaller. And by default, this thing is spinning around the center. Whereas if I were to say, translate 100 by 0, we get this thing spinning in kind of a 3D space. Maybe we can really see it if I do X, or rather Z, then we can tell it's not around its axis, but it's like out there a little bit orbiting. nice with the background turned off. Leave a trace, don't leave a trace. Okay, I'm playing with Y. And yeah, maybe this very first one is just chilling right at the center. And then let's do another one. Sphere, let's make one a bit smaller and translate it 0, 100, or rather maybe 100, 0. Maybe it needs to be more than the other one is, so 200 would make sense. 300 puts it perfectly outside of the other one. 350 gives me a little bit of buffer. So now I've got this kind of orbiting thing that could even go faster. Rotate Y, let's go like frame count, so it's going now quite a bit faster than the other thing. Maybe I just want it to be a little bit faster. It's maybe nice to let this frame count modulo, so it's kind of fading, and let's leave a trace again. It's always nice turning the background on and off to leave traces. Yeah, and then I could just keep going, keep going. Maybe I tell this one actually to be, whoops, an X. And then it should have like some offset on the Y, and then we get this other kind of orbiting, and then you just keep going. Copy, paste, maybe a Z. Make this thing even smaller. Maybe not so far away from the other one. So it's like this little, some kind of arm, octopus arm, something flying in space. Leave a trace. Let's turn off this. Let's overwrite this and say fill black and see what these things look like while they leave kind of an orbit of their path. Could always change to a box. Back to a sphere. Yeah, but I think I'll try to turn this thing into a class, because I think it'd be interesting to maybe make this recursive and be able to say like how many extensions out it has and how many rotations do they make from each other, because then when you have a bunch of these things, it could be an interesting sort of planetscape. So I'm going to turn all this off. It freezes, unless I have a background, then it's gone. And start to make a class. I'll call this thing orbit. Constructor. And I'm going to need to know a couple things about it. I'm going to need to know, let's see. I'm going to feed it in off X, in off Y, and maybe the size. Let's call that like orbit size. And then hook it up. Off X equals, whoops, by the way, this dot off X equals off X. Stop what? I'll just use S for size. So I don't really need these things anymore. And let's try to build one of these things. So we're gonna want to display it later. And I can steal a bunch of this stuff. Maybe that'll be custom later on. And let's just steal this whole thing and see if we can quickly actually have this thing running. It's offset, I'll just say 0, 0, and its size 200. And then let's just show it. Display. All right, it's working. Yeah, so now we have one instance of this thing, and we need to start making them fancy. So I should start using these variables, actually use the size, actually use my offsets, this dot off x, this dot off y, test out if it's working. Yep, that thing's spinning. A little hard to tell unless it was smaller. Yep. Okay, we'll keep it in the center for now. And maybe I want to choose how fast this thing is spinning on all of its axes. So maybe I need to feed this thing a, let's call it rot, and I'll give it an XYZ. P vector, let's say 0, 1, 0. And then let's patch it in. This dot, let's call it Rx equals rot.x. This dot Ry equals rot.y. This dot Rz equals rot.z. And test it out times this dot Ry. P vector, I'm in processing land, vector, create vector. I've been teaching with processing lately, so I'm going to make a number of mistakes, probably switching between the two until I get back into P5 land. Okay, let's see if this works. I know, yeah, because now we should be ready for an X and a Z. All right, spinning on an X axis and a Z axis, and could be a couple of them in this way. It could go like crazy fast. It could go in the minus direction, or it could go really slow. It's just barely moving there. So let's, doesn't really matter which one is spinning first. Yeah, so now I could technically have a couple of these things and just tell them to sit near each other, but I think I also wanted to play with recursion, because it's pretty fun telling this thing that it can like be itself going off. And so let's call something rec, and this will be how many levels deep it goes. Hopefully this will work, and I'll start out just by saying let's go 3 levels in, and do something like rec minus minus. If rec is more than 0, this dot O equals a new orbit itself. And then we have to give it these different values, which will be tricky how to assign what those things should be. I don't know, maybe it should just be either similar or different to the other guys. Maybe it needs to be at least as far away as the size is. So that this dot S, maybe first just 0. Its orbit size should be maybe half of the orbit size. So this dot S divided by 2, so it gets smaller and smaller. And then its rotations. Maybe I do some, yeah, we'll figure that out later. Let's just let's have them all do that rotation. And rec, so it'll feed like this recursion into itself, subtract, and so long as it's more than 0, it gets to build a level deep. then we need to show the thing. And it's probably not a bad idea to do a big old push pop around all this stuff so it doesn't mess with the other ones. But it should be listening to those and building up, so maybe another push and pop. I don't even know if these are necessary, but they probably help. And say this dot o dot display. All right, we have something. But they stopped moving. That's for the whole thing. What does our console say? Display of undefined. Maybe because I don't always have an O, only if it's recursive. If this dot O does not equal let's do to undefined. Recompile, hard compile. All right. Control T to clean up the code a bit if I'm missing some tabs. Sweet, we have a kind of weird army thing. Maybe we just need to have two of these things and then it will kind of look like a weird snowman. Let's add a second one before we go further. O2. O2. And it needs something to be different. Maybe 2. 1. That's its size. Change one of these guys. Whoops. Okay, no, there's too many consistent things happening. If I say 4, I know why. I'm not showing the thing. O2 display. There we go. All right, it kind of looks like snowman hands. Let it go out to 4 positions. Maybe the whole thing should be getting way bigger so we can see. 2, 2. Interesting. Okay. One could already start offset from the other. Or even be 200 over and just be 100 big, 100 big, and then they're two totally separate things running on their own. Yeah, but let me turn off our number 2 for a minute. And see what else should be customized in this class to make it interesting. I think all these things need to get further away from each other. So it's also a question if it's further away on the X or the Y. Maybe it always needs to be ×2 away from it. If I want it to be actually orbiting, yep, that's true. And then it's a question, why only on the X and not also on the Y? Maybe it's enough. Oh no, then they're still touching. Yeah, so maybe times 1.25, be a little bit off. And it's always nice to turn off background and leave some traces and see what this thing is doing. Yeah, but it's really consistent. Things are too consistent right now because it's making the exact same orbit path. So I think that's a lot about these ones, where it's then always the same amount of movement. I think I just need to maybe initialize them with some random values there. It would just be random 1. And just give all these things a random chance to have a certain rotation attached to them. Let's see what this looks like. Copy. We could just invent it here. Let CV equal create vector And let's plug that in here so this line doesn't get too long. And now it's going slow, but technically every time I run it, it'll be a bit different. So actually maybe I need just kind of like a global, how fast, what's the max, and then send it in a positive or minus direction. So you could do like, let rot speed be, let's say 3, so some of these things can go pretty fast. And then I'm gonna build this once here and copy it up above. I'll say minus rot speed to rot speed. This should be a function, but I'm just gonna plug them all in there. Maybe it should be a function. Function gen speed. Return random this. Let's see if that works. Gen speed, gen speed, gen speed. Yep. And that could be down here too. This whole thing could probably be a function. Gen speed, but maybe we want to feed something into that. All right, now it's going a little too crazy, but it looks fun. Let's slow it down and say your max, and then we could say like your max is 0.5 and we get super slow orbits, or 2. Maybe the amount of distance from each other shouldn't be so consistent, because that might be making the whole thing a little too clean. This is if we zoom everything up a bit. And maybe I do slow it down. And make this a bit smaller, so we can still see everything. Maybe we don't trace for a minute. What is it like if I let this thing go even further out? I wonder how many recursions it can handle. 5, 6, 7. I think eventually the thing goes pop and it's like too small to see. Okay, but let's go just back to 4 or 5. And yeah, let's choose, maybe this is a certain random number for how far away that thing should be. It should probably be at least the size away. Actually, let's quickly see what happens if it's not. Somehow everything is inside of there. Okay, that's no good. Back. If it's exactly S, they would be touching again, which was kind of cool. That was like if we wanted it to be kind of like an arm. It depends if this thing is going into octopus territory or planetary territory. Maybe I just say times, you know what I should do? I should let this gen speed get some generator. No, whatever. Let's just create it here. Let off r equal random from 1 up to 2. For how far these things should be from each other. There, that way they're at least as big as the thing is and potentially further. Right now they're all spheres. We could just easily change them to boxes and see what boxes look like. That's also kind of cool. Maybe it's nice with a trace. Woo. Yeah, but I think we quickly need to start playing with a few of these things. to see what that even means. What is it doing? And I guess the way it's set up, it's still all based around where the actual position is. So I could easily move this thing actually if I said translate mouse X, mouse Y. I think because the center of the page is now 0, 0 minus width divided by 2. There we go. So that's what it's like if I move the thing around manually. Yeah, but maybe I should just generate a few of these things and see what happens. So each one, yeah, it's a question if I should also be feeding in an initial X and Y, so it just sits at that spot. It's probably not a bad idea to like be telling it where to be, which means feeding even more values in here. Good or bad, I'm not sure. Let me steal this little line of code so that this gets a little smaller. We can shrink that to just CV, oops, CV to generate those values. Yeah, let's create a handful of these things. Let's call them let orbits equal a collection of them. And I wanted to feed it where to start off. So I'll just call this X, Y. And I'll say this dot X equals X. And set the initial translation for all this stuff there. And now it's freaking out because I haven't given it one. So if I said 0, 0, that's the center of the page. It's not happy about something. 0, 0. This dot X pause, maybe this variable is taken. X pause, Y pause. Whoops. I know why it's breaking. Damn. Because this one down here needs to know those positions as well. So I think it should also be this dot X pause, this dot Y pause. And it should be happy. It's not happy. This dot Y pause, X pause. Oh, because I have 2 times. Translate, and down here I said pause. Pause. There we go. Great. So now I could put this somewhere else and could say height divided by 3, and it should start out lower. All right. Yeah, so let's make a few of these things. How many? Let's say let orbit count equals 4 of them. Orbits dot push. And then we can kind of feed this guy in there. We can turn off our display. And now these need kind of, maybe it's good just to give them random positions. Have to use the width and height divided by 2 because we're in the center of the page with WebGL. So that should have created them. Maybe they should also have a random size. Random from like 50 up to 250. I'll let them, maybe because we're building a bunch, I'll start out with just 3 arms. That was about the offset from that initial spot. For now, let's keep it as it is. And let's display them. looping through all of them. And I can just say orbits I.display. Ah, that's no good. They all have the exact same CV. They should each get their own speeds. And now it's probably fun to spin around this thing. It's so much fun to spin around in 3D. So I'm going to turn the background back on. I'm going to turn off the fill so we can see through stuff. Technically this is like being used by all of them, so until I make them unique, let's just have it be global. So we can see through this stuff for better or worse. Maybe it is better we don't see through it. And let's spin around. Divided by 2, slow it down. Something that could be fun is to make like every other one sphere in a box. We can tell who's the initial articulation and who's the next one. Maybe I go back to spheres. Yeah, in P5Live, everything is happening smoothly, so I can do things like suddenly turn that off and now we have no fill, turn it back on and we have a fill. But if I change the class, like changing this back to a sphere, I have to recompile because all those instances are out there and exist. I have to do a hard compile until like redo the whole thing. And then we have this sort of planetary scape. What happens if we spin and trace? Nice when it gets really close to the camera and clears everything that had been there before. Right now, these are about like perfect. Let's play with toruses. Let's put some donuts in motion. Torus. Recompile. I think I have to give it a couple values. This S, it also needs to know how thick these things are. I don't know if you want the same. Then it's a really thick donut. Half is a bit more like a donut. Oh, that looks nice. This one that's like a ring around itself. Ooh, we could see inside it for a minute. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to get quite so big. Say up to 200. And maybe we need to make them donut colored. We don't have to be abstract here. So what is donut colored? Maybe we don't want to fill. No ellipse, no stroke. And we want the fill to be, I don't know what a donut color is. Close. Not so close. Do we need RG? I think we need less G. Ooh, that's better. That's pretty close. Maybe we do need a stroke, otherwise... but actually the stroke should just be like a shade of this color, maybe. And make it darker, like 50. Maybe this should also be darker. Here we go. It's a plain donut. Sprinkles, now you want sprinkles on the donut. How do we make sprinkles? Or bagels, these could be bagels. Maybe they should be bagels with everything on it. I don't know if the computer can handle a whole bunch of glitter bagel seeds, sprinkles around these things, but it could be kind of fun to try. Actually, I was also curious to swap out these shapes with text and see what happens when just text flies around. But let's give this thing, what is this like without a background? Oh, it's always fun to do like what is it, normal material, normal material. Was it material? Yeah, to get some really colorful bagel donuts in there. It's also fun to put a texture on it. I think I have a fish just hanging out there. Let's just see what it's like. It's always fun to play with a fish. Let image. We should do a function preload and get this fish in here. Image equals load image. And then I have to remember where this is. I put stuff in my data, images, fish.png. It didn't turn red or anything, so that must have worked. Just a note, this is on my local computer. I'm running P5Live in a local way. You can go read about P5Live, you can go scroll way down towards the bottom, and this is an offline server. So like all of my sketches and everything are hanging out over here, offline, don't need the internet, and that way I can access files that are on my computer. And so I have a fish that's always hanging out, ready to use, and I'm gonna say, I loaded it, oh, I don't need anything in the setup, we just need it here, and say texture image, yay, fishy. Let's say no stroke again, no stroke, we can just override the previous stroke. And now we've got some weird fish tori. Tauruses, tori. Let's trace them and hide the menu. We're looking inside of a fish. Maybe it's nice to change our form again. That was a torus. Let's turn that off for a sec and try out a box. This.s. And it's kind of fun, it puts the texture on all four faces of our shape, although it's squishing it. So I guess we should make an elongated box. We should say, I forget what the values are. Let's quickly check the reference for box. Control R opens up your reference. I can set the width, height, and depth. So it's probably the width that I need to make bigger. Let's say ×2 and this dot s, whoops, s. Recompile. Yeah, that looks about a little bit better. No, it doesn't. On some of the faces, it looks better. Maybe this should also be this dot s ×2 for its depth. Nope. Some squish fish, some normal fish, all kinds of fish. Let's play with a sphere. Sphere, this dot s. Nice, that's like a super curly fish. Get my mouse back over here. Yeah, interesting to see flying fish. Zoom. No, I'm still rotating. Didn't look like it because we're leaving a trace, but let's turn off our background and then we can see these things spinning around. I have no idea what other images I have hanging out there. Probably sure I have a tree. Do I have a tree? .jpeg maybe? Nope. Do I have a donut? I doubt it. Do I have a bagel.png? I guess not. Nope, just have a fish. Okay, maybe we go back to our geometrical thing, or we switch to type and see what this looks like. We're sending some text flying around. Could be kind of cool. I was also curious what happens if these aren't individual spheres, but like points making up a vertice. Like if we kind of try to draw those as articulate lines. And I wonder if I can just say, I don't know if the rotate will affect this thing, but let's try this once and say begin shape, probably down here, end shape. And then maybe instead of the translate, we put a vertex there. Vertex, I'm gonna turn off that thing and say this dot off X, this dot off Y. And we probably need to have a bright stroke. stroke 255, and we got nothing. Maybe we don't translate. Maybe this needs to be exposition, this thing. Or maybe this just won't work. Wait, because this is like, each one is being told to begin shape, end shape. Maybe I need to surround that around here. This might do absolutely nothing. I was optimistic, but then they would all be connected. That's not very exciting yet. What about this guy again? Really exciting. Okay, never mind. I think the vertex ignores some of these translations and rotates and such. So that's not so fun. But let's play with some type in here. For that we need to we need to load a font in 3D space. I think I need to cheat and go see a 3D font. P5Live Session. I was playing with one for this intro guy. There we go. Can grab Roboto Mono. Let's get back to our sketch. I haven't been saving as at all. I should at the very least turn donuts back on and save this as donuts clone. Let's call that orbiting bagels. It's bagels maybe. I don't know if it's donuts or bagels. And I'll clone it again so I can keep playing off of that. All right, I copy pasted that line. I didn't even need to load the sketch. That was silly. Just as a reminder, when you want to check out the code for something else, what I should have done was P5Live Session, and I know this is the code I want, and I could have just said inspect, and then I could go see the code without loading it and copy that line. I could even edit it, but probably not a good idea unless you're fixing a bug after it crashed. So I've got font, and now I want to load that font. Text font is my font. And now I should be able to put text there. Let's turn off the torus and say text blah 00. Super tiny. Text size is this.s. All right, it's floating, maybe even ×2. Maybe we want to say to align the text align center. Let's override our fill with white. Maybe override the stroke with black. And trace. Hide our menu. Something else that's really fun to use is, besides just having it rotate, orbit control. And then I can pivot this thing. So maybe I'll turn the background back on. And then I can rotate and spin around and check out what is happening here. Maybe I have it tell us which level in these things are. So I should say this dot rect equals our rect. And then I could have it tell me what level in it is. And then I know that's like a 3, a 2, and a 1 hanging out down there. And maybe I let these things go even further again, 7, and they can start out quite big. Or even 8. Let's turn off the trace, or turn on tracing. Get some spinning, orbiting type in motion. That's kind of fun. Maybe the fill needs to be like a frame count modulo. So it like fades in and out. Or maybe each one needs to be its own level in. Would be interesting because now they're all on the exact same synchronization. So even though that says that up there, I'm going to override it down below and put it anywhere before I have my text. So maybe just within this push, I can get rid of this begin shape, end shape. That was a fail. Let's put it here. And basically this is doing a nice like motion, and I need to somehow tell this thing to be offset a bit. So I could say this dot rect times 15. I don't know how much I need, but just something that each one is at a different phase of its life. What happens if I still have a sphere? What if I brought the sphere back, which would cover up the text, but then I could put the text in a sphere. So I could say no fill, stroke, white, not. Or maybe it should be the opposite of this number I'm generating here. So I could say FC and let FC equal that. And then I could just do the opposite of that down here. 255 minus FC, invert the number. That looks nice and trashy. Maybe the stroke weight needs to be really small. Stroke weight 0.2. So we just barely see this thing leaving it. It's really nice in WebGL playing with stroke weights that are less than 1 because they just leave kind of like a dust behind. And maybe the sphere doesn't need to be nearly as big. What happens if I turn our texture back on? Do we get fishes and numbers? I have no idea. No, I think the fill overrid it. So if I go back down here, I could maybe turn it back on. All right. We can have numbered fish, fishies. Yeah, we can. It doesn't mean that we want to. Let me turn the text off again. It was fun having text, but maybe it's also nice just playing with this kind of like pixelated texture that it's leaving, this really soft grain, I would call it. And maybe this thing should get way, way, way bigger to leave a lot of grain. So I could let some of these things be massive. Maybe even, let's just say height. Maybe I start them out at height, so now they're really big. And I could make them even thinner strokes. That is already really thin. Maybe everybody starts out huge. Maybe I only need 2 of them. But let's just look at one. Introduce some color in there by giving another value to this. Oh, we have no fill. That doesn't make a difference. Add it here with 1 less. All right, it kind of looks like an apple. Let's go to a box. All right, we just created a screensaver from the mid-90s, I would say. It's gotta be one of the After Darks that was out there. Let's turn Taurus back on. Yeah, we're just building up lots of lines. Ooh, that looks nice, that initial twist, so maybe I should go back to having them start out smaller. Maybe everything's just too saturated. Let's have a couple of these things going. Technically you can play with some alpha, so they are not totally opaque. Could also lower their detail. I think it's like so there aren't as many vertices attached. Okay, but like this, I'm curious to see it in black and white again. Ooh, very, very opaque. Ah, there it goes. Testing minimal stream. How few pixels can you see out there? It starts to look a bit like X-rays, maybe. We're looking at the vertebrae of some kind of fish or something. It'd be nice if it was a little bit brighter. Let's make this not so translucent, but it is good. I think that's translucent. Let's try 200. That might already be too much. I think that's too much. 150. Or maybe it's nice that it's not fading from black to white, but it's just white with translucent, so it takes a while to build up. Yeah, that kind of looks like some kind of skeleton. I think I'm going to scale it down. Let's say 8. And let's just leave that thing, but turn it off and tell this thing to always be 250, but a little more translucent. Hopefully it looks at all interesting on the stream and isn't just bit crushed by compression. And now I should be patient and let this thing build itself up, pressing Control S every once in a while to save a screenshot. Could start to look like a long exposure of orbiting planets, what it is, or maybe it, yeah, like this idea of trying to get it to look more and more like an X-ray. I think I'm going to, what happens if I don't have any alpha? Yeah, then it's quickly building this thing up for better or worse. But then maybe it's nice to let the speed go a bit crazier so it doesn't leave such a trace. Let's go even faster. Oh, I think our box is still a funny size from when we were playing with the fish. No, it's a torus. How does torus work? Torus. Yeah, that's right. The detail X and Y. Okay. Let's go back to boxes. Yeah, I think with a box it kind of looks a bit like a vertebrae or spine. I think we need a bit more orbit action that it can start out moving in another direction. Where was I controlling some of that? Gen speed was all about that. Oh, this amount of offset. I don't know if I ever played with that in the end. Maybe that helps that now that first one isn't orbiting and pivoting in place, but even it is on a orbit moving around. We're looking into some fourth dimension. We're seeing time axes here. Let's switch to a sphere. Maybe stop dividing. Yeah, that gets too quick, too full, so we should make it semi-translucent. Yeah, we'll see how pixelated all these things are out there on the feed. But here it's got a pretty cool noise to it. I guess one downside of putting these stroke and fill and all that here in the class is I can't change it on the fly. So maybe before I wrap up, I'm gonna take all that stuff away, make sure that there's no strokes or anything, or I just have no fill. And then I can change the stuff in the draw, which is really nice. I might have to start over. Oh no, I could just say, oh yeah, I have to build it once more without any of that stuff being in the class itself. And now it's cool that I have the flexibility to live code, like smoothly soft compile, I guess I would call it. I can now change it to be black, and then it will overwrite some of that stuff it had already drawn on the page. And then when I'm tired of that, I could add some color into it. I could do like 0, 255, 255, and get some cyan in there. some magenta. Some yellow, hit save before it's too saturated. Control S, Control S. And then maybe it's nice to have a little bit of black in there for some texture. And that's enough. We should go back, undo. Yeah, and I can just hit undo and keep playing with those other colors that I had in there. Just play like undo, redo game without having to code any of these. It'd probably be nice to just actually give a randomizer of a bunch of different colors. That might be clever. Let's stop drawing for a sec. Tell it to stop display and say everything's kind of calmed down. Let calls equal, let's just invent a bunch of colors. Color 255, 255, 0. Color. And then if I said random calls, it would be tripping out all the time. But I could also just slow that down and tell it pick a new one every so often. So maybe I just make a global and say let call self or select. Tell it to be this thing. Call select equals random calls. And then use it. This could be global, but then it might be nice to be able to change this thing all the time and say if frame count modulo 30 equals 0. Do this thing. I think it's I killed it. Oh, maybe because it doesn't equal anything at the beginning. It should equal a color. Let's start it off at a color. Crap. This might have to be in the setup. There we go. So it needed some value to kick it off, and now it's like every half second changing into one of these. I think I forgot to put white in there as well. So it has the chance to be white. And then could say like every once a second or so. There it is. Yeah, and now what I should be doing is playing with, there's this cool library, P5 Rezo, for drawing on a Rezo graph. And it could be fun to maybe each one of these things isn't drawing directly, but rather on a layer that goes and gets printed on a Rezo graph, and then you could tweak this into a bunch of different colors. So we can see what just one of those plates would look like. If I said we only have one of these things and we stop changing its color, it could be something like this, and then layer the other ones on top of it. That could be kind of nice. All right. Let's go to 255, have that be the initial color. And what happens if I put text back on? We had fill and all that stuff happening up there. Maybe the fill should also be this global. Whoops, let's just turn that stuff off. Turn that off. Let's do the same thing for fill. Does that work? It does. All right, I think it's time to wrap up this first session of P5Live Sessions. for those of you in the US of A, I hope you have already voted, early voted. I hope you have a smooth process to voting. I hope everything stays calm today, tomorrow, the next days. Yeah, I wish everyone a safe, smooth time out there. And I hope you've enjoyed watching this streaming. We'll be back next week with something totally different. Who knows where we'll go there. If you want more streaming, I highly recommend go check out The Coding Train. You're probably familiar with, I'm sure you're familiar with. Cozy Coding, Computational Mama. There's a handful of live streams out there. I'm sure there's already a collection of live streams for P5JS, but I'll try and compile a handful of those together so you can get your streaming in outside of Tuesday evenings at 9 o'clock. But thanks for joining, and hope to see you next week. Ciao.